Hi everybody! Today I'd like to talk to you about a true superfood. Milk! Yes! Whenever people learn that I, as a nutrition coach, nutrition consultant, drink and love milk, they look at me in disbelief. Milk? You drink milk? As if milk was truly a poison, as if it was the most unhealthy, unsustainable, unethical food that you could put into your body. And I always answer the same thing. There is no such thing as milk. There is no such thing as meat, bread, whatever food. Whether or not a food is regenerative or degenerative, both for the human body and for this planet, depends on the way this food has been produced, the way it has been processed, and who is consuming it. So in this video I am going to explain to you why milk can truly be a regenerative food and under what conditions. We're going to talk about the different types of milk. We're going to talk about the ways milk can be processed. We talk about the different ways of animal raising, animal farming, and also about biochemical individuality and the different constitutions and how they are affected by milk. So let's get started talking about the different types of milk, starting with the different types of animals that milk can come from. In our European regions, the animals that provide us with milk are cows, goats, and sheep. And so we're going to focus on these. Many people consider goats and sheep milk to be healthier than cow's milk. Personally, I feel that they can all be healthy and regenerative, again depending on the way these cows, these goats, these sheep have been raised, what they have been fed, and also then what's being done to the milk afterwards. But in general, the reasons why people consider goats and sheep's milk to be superior are three. The first one has to do with the protein contained in the milk, the casein, which is the main protein we find in the animal milk. There are others as well, the whey, but when it comes to casein, that's the one that many people react to, are intolerant to. And cow's milk, most cow's milk contains casein as the A1 type, whereas goats and sheep's milk contains casein of A2 type, which for most people, or for many people, is less reactive. They tolerate that better. The milk of Jersey cows also contains casein and A2 type, so this milk would also fall into this category. The second reason is that goats and sheep are smaller animals, and it is argued that since milk is meant to nourish a baby animal and help it grow, that cow's milk contains too much growth hormone for us humans, because it's meant to make a calf grow relatively rapidly to several hundreds of kilos animal weight. And so goats and sheep, being smaller, have more our human size, and so it is argued that this is better for us since the growth hormone is contained in smaller quantities. And growth hormone makes tissues grow, so sometimes people feel that this can be linked to cancer or other diseases where we have an excess of tissue growth, of cell growth. and so they prefer goat and sheep milk to reduce that exposure to that hormone that's naturally contained in the milk. The third reason has to do with the homogenization of the milk. Homogenization means that the fat particles in the milk all have the same size, which prevents the cream separating from the milk, as would happen in cow's milk when you buy it in a truly raw and natural state, and you leave the glass of milk standing for a while on the sink, then the cream would rise and you get this nice layer of cream, which I personally really enjoy. But the industries do not want that because people generally don't like it, and so they homogenize the milk by applying high pressure to the milk and forcing it through very small holes, so that then the bigger fat globules are separated into smaller ones and they all end up having the same size. Goats and sheep's milk is naturally homogenized. So homogenization as such is not bad. The problem is that if we apply high heat or high pressure to food, that it can change its chemical structure, its makeup, and actually change it, destroy it, and denature it, with potentially harmful consequences for the human body. So I recommend that you buy only non-homogenized cow's milk, raw cow's milk, or naturally homogenized goats or sheep milk to avoid that processing step that potentially can make the milk more pro-inflammatory for your body. Another important aspect when it comes to the quality of the milk that you buy is whether or not it's been pasteurized or even ultra-pasteurized. Pasteurization means that the milk is heated for a few seconds to a certain temperature, around 70 degrees. Ultra-pasteurization, the temperature rises to 120 or something like that for just 1 or 2 seconds, with the idea to kill potentially harmful bacteria and or to make the milk more durable, more storable on the shelves. As you know, the ultra-pasteurized milk is sold even out of the refrigerator. It doesn't require any coldness anymore, whereas the pasteurized milk still needs to be stored in the refrigerator. And pasteurization can indeed, in certain contexts and circumstances, be useful, depending really on the hygiene in a country, at a certain farm, in order to truly prevent infection, food infection, and to get sick. And we have to be aware that it denatures the milk, that it reduces not only the content of possibly bad bacteria, but also the good bacteria, and that it disactivates digestive enzymes that actually help us digest the milk, such as lactase, which is the enzyme that helps us digest the milk sugar, the lactose, which many people after a certain age no longer produce. And of course, high heat also reduces the content of certain vitamins and other important immune factors contained in raw milk. If you know your producer, if you know under what circumstances he produces, if you trust him or her, then you can absolutely consume raw milk. In fact, it's the only type of milk that I personally consume, and it can be as safe or even safer as pasteurized milk. The reason that the industries have done a great job of lobbying to make selling raw milk even illegal in many countries is because for them it is not a very interesting product, because it's not very shelf stable. It has a relatively short time that it can be consumed, just 5 days more or less. And so for the industries that's of no interest. In addition to that, industries usually receive the milk of hundreds of different farms, and they mix it all together, so the milk that you buy in the supermarket is actually not the milk of one cow or of the cows of one farm. It's a mixture of many hundreds of animals, and of course the industries have to pasteurize that milk, have to make sure that it's not contaminated by just one batch of contaminated milk from one of the hundreds of farms that provide them with their milk under conditions that might not always be as hygienic or as supportive for the good health of the animals. If they are confined together in stables and feed on grains and soy that are not meant really for their digestive tracts, they get more susceptible to disease. And so industrial milk processors do have to pasteurize in order to reduce that risk of contamination. And so the small individual farmers that are selling the truly nutritious superfood raw milk are an unwanted competition for them, because they cannot actually even compete with them, because it's a product they cannot provide. And so this is one of the reasons why these days it's actually illegal in many countries, not in all countries, but in many countries, for farmers to sell it like that, getting rid of that unwanted competition. But if you can get hold of it and you trust your farmer, then it's truly the best that you can consume. In fact, it's the only thing that I would personally consume. I do not drink any kind of pasteurized milk, let alone sterilized, ultra-pasteurized milk, even if it is, so to say, organic. Because even if the milk doesn't contain the chemicals from GMO feed or from antibiotics, it's still been processed, highly processed, and so that originally maybe nutritious milk has been denatured to some extent. And so I personally try to avoid that, even though I sometimes also cook with my high quality raw goat's milk. And home cooking is actually a different thing than pasteurizing, because you usually heat it up for a longer time. And so by boiling it for a few minutes even, you actually finish the process of breaking down the protein chains in the milk that during pasteurization, which is only happening for a few seconds, is not completed. And so that is actually worse than home boiling your milk. So in case of doubt, it's always better to get truly high quality raw milk and boil it at home if you are in doubt about the bacteria. But it's much better than buying an already sterilized or pasteurized milk in the stores. Another reason why it is better to buy a raw milk and process or not process it at your home is because all milk that you buy in the stores, even the whole milk, which we could consider the least processed, the most natural, has been processed. It has basically been skimmed, the fat has been taken out of it and then put back in at exactly the percentage that corresponds to the type of milk that you buy. 3.5% if it's whole milk, 1.5% if it's semi-skimmed milk, and 0.1, 0.2% if it's skimmed milk. In nature, this kind of artificial constancy doesn't exist. There is always natural variation in the fat content, in the fat composition, in the taste, in the color of the milk, depending on the season and depending on what type of food the animals have eaten. And that changes, of course, throughout the season if they are actually pastured. If they are not, their feed might be the same all year round, grains, the same composition, the same ratios, and that would produce a milk that is quite standardized in taste and in color and in fat composition. And that is what industries are actually looking for, because they don't want the product to taste differently at different times of the year, because the consumer doesn't want it. He wants to have always that taste that he enjoys, or she. And so the industries try to keep the products the same. But in nature, that doesn't exist. If we are in spring and all the pastures are green and there are flowers, yellow, red, all kinds of colors, this will be noted in the milk. In fact, my goat farmer, he can really differentiate the type of plants that his animals have eaten by the way the milk tastes. And they do different cheeses depending on the season, depending on what the animals have had a chance to eat out in the mountains, whether it's a lot of green plants or whether it's already more the dry hay. It changes. And I personally think that is beautiful, and it would probably support also our body exactly in the way that is needed for a specific season. So it's just good to be aware that even whole milk has undergone quite a lot of processing, that it is no longer the same as when it came out of the body of the animal, which is what you get when you drink raw milk. That leads us to the next important topic, which is the type of animal farming that makes a difference of day or night when it comes to the quality of the milk that you buy and whether or not it can be considered a regenerative or a degenerative food. Most milk on the market, just as most food on the market, plant or animal food, these days is produced in an industrial way. And when it comes to animals, that means basically factory farming, which is what we usually see in the pictures, and which is for most of us really repulsive. And these kind of animals spend a huge portion of the day in stables eating in order to fatten them, in order to make them produce what they are here to produce, whether it's milk or eggs or meat. So they are really considered a thing, a machine to produce something, and only the minimum standards of animal welfare that are required by law are fulfilled. These animals feed mainly on grain, soy, corn, most of the time GMO. Maybe they also get some hay or some silage. In this kind of scenario, the former pasture lands are transformed into croplands, which releases a lot of nitrogen into the atmosphere when we dig up that pasture land. And transform it into land to plant corn or soy in, it releases a lot of carbon back into the atmosphere, because carbon is stored in the soil. It's the best storage point for carbon, a fertile soil. So that gets released when we take the animals off the pasture land, put them into stables, and grow crops in that place of the former pasture land. And then we transport these crops to the stables to feed the animals, and then we have to take their excrements back out onto the fields to fertilize them, instead of having the animals grazing on that very pasture land, doing what they have to do in place, and at the same time trampling the soil and enjoying a life that is aligned with their natural behavior and natural needs. So you already see that it's just really not making any sense, at least from an environmental perspective. From a financial perspective, apparently it does, because otherwise we would not be doing it. Because on corn and soy, the animals fatten up quicker and they produce more. So on the one hand, we have the intensive way of animal farming, what we know as factory farming, mass production, under all the sad and not really ethical or sustainable conditions that we know about. And on the other hand, we have the extensive way of doing animal farming, where we can again differentiate into different ways of pasturing animals. And not all of them, unfortunately, are regenerative. Regenerative truly means that we increase the health and fertility of the land, and depending on how we do grazing, this might or might not happen. In fact, under the ecological label, regeneration of the land is not required. There are rules when it comes to the number of animals that you can keep per hectare. There are rules when it comes to the amount of feed that you can bring in from external sources compared to what you produce on your own land. There are rules when it comes to the medicine that you can apply, antibiotic usage, etc., and of course the chemicals in the feed. But there is no requirement that really the soil gets regenerated. And in fact, many forms, unfortunately, of extensive grazing can even lead to the degeneration of land over time. So if we think about these typical 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 cows that we see walking around with a lot of space in the nature, and we might think, wow, that's great, they live really a truly natural life and that is the way it should be. Yes, it might be great for the animals, although it doesn't actually, because they are herd animals. And if we leave them scattered around permanently on the same spot of land, it actually leads to overgrazing of the plants that they enjoy, because then they go and eat those first and again and again and again, and to undergrazing of the plants that they don't enjoy that much, which they would just not eat at all. And so over time that would lead to the death of these preferred plants and the uncontrolled growth of the undesirable plants. So we would see really a loss of biodiversity, a degeneration of soil fertility and health. And so ideally the grazing is done in a holistic way, in a regenerative way, where animals are packed together in herds as they would used to when they were still living under wild conditions, when there were predators going after them, and they had to stay together as a means of protecting themselves also. And they would move around constantly because they would eat, and then they would move on because they would also pee and shit, and of course they don't like to eat where they have done all of that. So as we would either, don't like to eat on the toilet, right? And so also the animals move on and then only come back to the same spot of land after some time, after the plants have grown again. And that is the way we can actually create regeneration of the land. We can increase soil health and soil fertility, and with that increase carbon sequestration, the capacity of that soil to store carbon back into the soil, to store water and absorb it, so preventing droughts and floods also. And in that scenario, when the animals have actually contributed to the regeneration of the land, then also the milk or the meat that they produce will be truly regenerative for the human body. A food cannot contain what it hasn't received. If the animals have been fed corn or soy that's been grown in a degenerative way, in a way that destroys soil health and fertility, the milk or the meat they produce cannot regenerate your body. And also energetically speaking, only a food that has contributed to the regeneration of the land, that has been produced on land that is healthy and fertile, can actually pass on these qualities to a human being. And so ideally we look out for farmers that work in a holistic way, in a regenerative way, and support them by buying their meat, their milk, and by doing so allowing them to continue creating a different way of doing animal farming, because it's possible, but it doesn't happen by itself. We need to support the people walking into the right directions, because they too need to make a living. If they are meant to invest all their time and all their energy into regenerating the land, into really taking care of animals in an ethical way, which often means in a less productive way, in a way that makes them get less out of the animals, then they also need to have some sort of return from that. Unless they, of course, have such a big cushion, financial cushion, that they can just do it for fun, but that's not going to be true for most people. And so they need us. They need us in order to take care of animals rather than abusing them, in order to take care of the land instead of abusing it, in order to produce high quality food rather than foods that destroy our health and our planet. These farmers are also the ones that keep ancient breeds alive, because the industries only use a handful of breeds, the most productive ones, and the other ones get lost if nobody invests their time, their energy to keep them alive. Because these days animals are no longer wild, they are domesticated, and they need somebody to take care of them so that they can continue. If we don't, then we lose more and more breeds of animals, and with that more and more biodiversity, and with that more and more resilience. And we actually give more and more power to the very industries that produce food for us. This is true for animals, this is true for plants also. The industry always works only with the most productive varieties of seeds also. And so we lose so much biodiversity if we don't look for these farmers, individual people who are still doing an effort to maintain our heritage, the heritage of the regions, the animals and plants that are adapted to a specific climate, that are more resilient but less productive, but that produce also more nutritious food. And so again, we have to put quality over quantity. And for that, we have to step out of the industrial anonymous system. And we also have to stop thinking that the solution is to no longer eat any animal foods. Because as I explained in different videos, this would only lead eventually to the industries gaining more strength and to losing all these small individual farmers who are trying to create a different reality when it comes to food production and animal farming in particular. They need people to support them so that they can continue doing that. Which is why I always say, eat what you want to keep and support what you want to see grow. Animal farming is so important for land regeneration. We cannot regenerate all the huge amounts of land of this world without animals. Maybe we can do it on a very small scale in our urban gardens or on small farms, but if you think of all the grasslands, if you think of the mountains, of forests, of deserts even, national parks, they need animals. And these animals, they give us the gift of milk, of eggs, of meat, so that this way of regenerating our land also pays back a certain value for us, for the one investing all their time and energy into doing that important work. If animals are not used to pasture, to clear also all that vegetation that grows year after year after year back, then the risk for wildfires increases significantly. And so animal farming, if it's done in a non-industrial way, actually helps to prevent destructive wildfires, which would otherwise create a lot of destruction, a lot of suffering, a lot of death. And so, ironically, by eating animal products, by eating even individual animals, we can help to keep alive whole breeds, but we can also help to prevent a lot of death of the soil, of the animals living in these areas that get burned, of people even. So it makes much more sense, that kind of natural animal farming that is in sync with nature, the way it's always been, animals and plants evolving together, then that absolutely senseless industrial model of doing animal farming, where we take the animals off the pasture land, put them into stables, bring them the food into the stables, take out their shit and put it back on the field, it doesn't make any sense. And then using petrol fueled machines to clear the mountains and riverbanks because there are no more animals simply eating what would be their natural food. It just doesn't make any sense, really, if you think about it. Now, a very important point to talk about is the argument that is often used against drinking milk, which is, but milk is meant for the baby cows. It's not meant for humans. And I agree, of course, the baby cows, the baby sheep, the baby goats are the first that should drink that milk. And in responsible animal farming, they are absolutely allowed to do that. They are not separated from their mothers as it's done in the industries in a quite cruel way. which I agree is not ethical. But there is a different way of doing animal farming, a way where they are allowed to stay together, where the babes drink at their mothers until they are old enough to no longer need that, and where only the excess of milk is taken for human consumption. So I absolutely agree that the milk should be first and foremost to nourish the babies of the animals. And we also need to understand that these babies only get born because there is the finality of selling milk or meat. If there was not that goal to do so, the farmer again would not even raise these animals. And so the babies would never get born. So, yes, the milk is for the baby cows, but the baby cows wouldn't be there if there were not people also drinking milk. And that is very important to understand. Wherever we give life, giving death is implied. The only way to avoid death would be to not give life in the first place. That's a choice a few people take, but I personally consider it to be an indirect way of killing by not giving life in the first place. And for me, the gift of life is one of the biggest gifts that we can receive. And I always say that it's more about the quality in the days that you live than the number of the days that you live. But I can understand if there are people who see this in a different light. But it's important to understand that if we enjoy seeing these cute baby cows with their moms, we also have to understand we only see them because there's a farmer who is taking care of them and who is making a living from selling milk or meat. Without this farmer selling milk or meat, we would see no more cows in the fields. No more baby cows, cute ones. No more bells, ding, 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 on your vacation in the rural areas. Very important to understand. Now let's come to the nutrition part of the milk. Milk is a truly nutritious food, very complete. It contains easy to digest sugars, the lactose. It contains proteins, the casein of its different types, the whey protein, and it contains also fat, depending on what the animal ate, more or less, and different types of fat, but generally speaking in quite even proportions, around 4% of each, 4% of fat, 4% of protein, 4% of carbohydrates. And the type of fat that the milk contains depends on the food that the animals have eaten. When the animals have indeed fed on pasture, then the fat composition and fat structure will be more favorable also for the human being. They will contain more omega-3 fatty acids. They will contain also more of the fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, which is basically the beta-carotene contained in the grass converted into true vitamin A that we can use and that we actually need for eyesight, for fertility, for the immune system, for thyroid. It contains more vitamin D also, because the animals have been exposed to sunshine. It contains vitamin K2 as well, very important fat-soluble vitamin. Also more antioxidants and even an anti-stiffness factor, if the milk is raw at least. So pasture-fed milk contains much more nutrition than stable produced milk from cows that have fed on grains, basically. Now, milk will always contain saturated fat and cholesterol as well, and that is not a bad thing. Actually, when we look at human breast milk, it is composed to more than 50% of saturated fat and cholesterol, because these are such important substances for the human body, and especially for a growing baby, to nourish its organs, to help it develop a strong immune system and hormonal system, for mental health. And so it's a myth that saturated fat and cholesterol are your enemies. It all depends again on so many other factors, but high cholesterol in the blood or heart disease are not necessarily linked to the cholesterol and fat content in your food. It has more to do with inflammation in the body, with stress in the body, with free radical damage from actually oxidized, unsaturated fats, industrially refined, from sugars, from refined flours, and of course from pollution, and from the deficiency in important vitamins and minerals, such as this mentioned vitamin A, for example, but also magnesium and iodine and selenium. In general, industrial food is often deprived of nutrients, and that leads to damages in our arteries and in our blood vessels, and inflammation in our system, blood sugar imbalances as well. And all of that then can lead to the plaque buildup and then increased risk of heart disease or other diseases in general, which besides that physical component, of course, also have to do a lot with our way of being and living that is so disconnected from nature, and just a reflection basically of finds its equivalent in our denatured food. So if you consume a high quality, raw ideally, milk from regeneratively pastured animals, or at least sustainably, ecologically, then you do not generally have to be afraid of the fat and cholesterol that this milk contains. To the contrary, it will be a great source of important substances for your body. In fact, all hormones are made from cholesterol, so the body really needs that substance also. It's a repair substance in the body. If you need more information, I have a lot of that on my blog as well. Now, when we look at the nutrition contained in plant drinks, which are considered to be an alternative for real milk, for animal milk, then we see that it has nothing to do, first of all, in the macronutrient makeup, but also in the micronutrient makeup. Plant drinks are generally very high in sugar, even if they don't have any added sugar, which would be the first thing to look out for, because many do. But if they are ecological, if they are organic, and they are labeled as added sugar free, then still they might contain up to 15% of sugar, 15 grams of natural sugar per 100 milliliter. depending on how much grain they contain and which type. Rice milk tends to be the highest in sugar, and ironically, the ones that contain more rice, which would be good, like more of the main ingredient, they would also contain more natural sugar. So you have some rice milks that only have 5% rice in them, and others that have 20%, and that would make a difference also in the content of the natural sugar. So ironically, the better quality ones, the ones that put more of the rice into their drink, would actually scale worse when it comes to the sugar content, natural sugar content. If you're in doubt, read the labels, and also trust your senses, because the sugar content can be felt. And I personally believe that many people enjoy plant drinks so much because they are basically sweets. They are juices. They can have more sugar than a Coke. And that might be a true disaster for your blood sugar. So always read the labels and make sure that you choose a plant drink that would have 5% maybe of natural sugar, like almond milk. The nuts and seeds generally provide less. Ideally make them yourself at home to avoid also additives that are usually added, or vitamins that often are added in forms that are not even bioavailable, like vitamin D2. The plant drinks usually don't have fat, which, on the packaging is marketed as an advantage, but as I just pointed out, the fat in the milk is actually super important and a carrier for these important fat-soluble vitamins. And when it comes to protein, of course, these plant drinks also scale much below the protein that is contained in animal milk. Now, that brings me to an interesting point as well, because many people argue that we don't actually need that protein contained in the animal milk, because breast milk only contains 1% of protein, whereas the animal milk tends to contain 4%, and that this is too much for us. But we forget in that argumentation that human breast milk, is meant to nourish a baby. And a baby that weighs much less than you do as an adult, and that drinks much more of the milk than you do as an adult usually. So if we do some math, a 7-kilo baby would drink about 1 liter per day, which would be around 10 grams of protein, and the need of protein of a human being, for an adult it's 0.8 to 1 gram per kilo of body weight. For a baby it's 1.2 to 1.4. So this liter provides exactly that need, that 1.2, 1.4 grams per kilo of body weight, 10 for 7. And so it's exactly that. An adult with 50, 60, 70, 80 kilos of body weight can of course ingest much more protein, and so the 4% contained in milk is a good source to cover some of that need. Besides the inferior nutrition, in my opinion, of plant drinks, we also often unintentionally and unknowingly support the very same industry practices that we wanted to avoid. So either make them yourself, or really find yourself a responsibly working farmer and support him or her by buying their cow, sheep, or goat milk. And with that, a true alternative to industrial animal farming. Now, even if we have the highest quality milk produced from regeneratively grazed cows, raw, that doesn't mean that drinking that milk will actually be regenerative for your individual body. because there is no one size fits all, and the healthiest food can be poison for you personally if your metabolism is not designed for it, or if you are sensitive to it, reactive to it. So we really need to understand that there is no superfood that is super for everybody, and that we actually have to understand and listen to our body's feedback if we want to understand which foods are truly nourishing our being on the physical level, but also beyond the physical level, because all foods also have a symbolic component. So when it comes to milk, what kind of people would benefit from it? Milk is a food that would be considered yin, that nourishes the feminine energy in us, that is quite watery. In fact, it's often said that milk creates mucus, and that sounds quite disgusting and bad and negative, but it basically means that it nourishes your waters. And there are people that can benefit from that, and these are usually the people that are more dry, that are more rigid, that have a lot of vata energy, quite a lot of airy, nervous energy, that benefits from the naturally sweet taste of milk. It's used in Ayurveda a lot. And in general, by women who would like to nourish that feminine side, who are low on estrogen maybe as well. On the other hand, it would not be recommended for people who have already a lot of body fluids, who are very humid, who have a lot of mucus production, who have a very weak digestion, who are always cold, who have soft stools and a pale body complexion and a white coating on their tongue. These would probably be people who don't benefit from consuming milk. Symbolically also, if we think of what milk represents, it is very much connected to the mother energy. And depending on how our relationship is to that energy, both to our own mother of origin, but also to the topic of motherhood, we might experience milk as nourishing or as conflictive in our body. In fact, we might even be allergic to it or sensitive to it or intolerant to it because we have an unconscious conflict with that mother energy. Astrologically speaking, milk nourishes the moon, it nourishes the Cancer element. So if someone has a lot of Cancer energy already in their chart, in their being, or if this energy is conflicted, is in conflict, is suppressed, is in opposition with something important, then this also might make you sensitive to the consumption of milk. But in general, it provides us with that sense of emotional stability and safety. When we then ferment milk into kefir or into yogurt, it changes actually energetically. It becomes more sour, more acid, and would nourish a different energy in us. It would nourish more our Vata energy, it would nourish more our Virgo energy. And depending also on how that energy is developed in ourselves, we would tolerate it more or less. The same for cheese. The milk changes and it would nourish a different energy in us. So we cannot generalize and say, if I don't tolerate any dairy, maybe I can do yogurt, but I can't do milk, or I can do milk and I can't do yogurt. Let's just be curious. and see food not only as something that feeds us on a physical level, but that also nourishes energies in us. And if we know which energy each food corresponds to and how our individual energy is made up and what energies we would actually like to support and which ones we might already have quite a lot of and we would not want to further strengthen, then we can use food in a truly empowered way without overthinking it. This is also something that we truly feel in our body. Of course, people like me can help you, can assist you. I do Astro-Metabolic Profiles. I help you understand the energies that are present in your being, your energetic constitution, and also which elements you might want to strengthen and which ones maybe not so much. But it's also something that you can actually feel in your body without ever having to mentalize it. So if I had only one message to share, it is that free your mind of any prejudices, of any mental concepts that you may have about milk or about any food, and allow yourself to again feel the effect that it has in your body. Allow yourself to feel whether or not your body would want it. And when you give it to it, observing the effect that it has in you in different moments of the day, in different moments of the month, and different moments of the year. It may change. We are living beings. We are dynamic. We are ever evolving. And so the most empowering skill that you can ever learn is to be open-minded, always fresh, to observe, to sense yourself, and to allow what you perceive to be, and to act upon it. Maybe you like milk a lot, but actually your body doesn't. Respect your body. Or maybe your body would crave milk, but your mind has ideas about it and doesn't allow it. Respect your body. Thank you for listening so far, and if you would like me to assist you in understanding whether or not milk can be a regenerative food for you, then don't hesitate to reach out. Prost, as you would say in German.